check this out, mate. This is the Xperia 1 Mark VI, and that is my finger at 4 centimeters away from a 120mm lens shooting 4K 120. Things are getting a little bit mad up in here, mate. The fact that we can now shoot macro shots at 120mm on an 85 to 170mm lens on a smartphone in 4K 120, mate, what are we doing? Filmmaking's getting a little bit crazy, mate. Oh yeah, and for good measure, I'm going to shoot all of this studio B-roll of the Xperia 1 Mark VI on an Xperia 1 Mark VI. So the Xperia 1 Mark VI, an incredible smartphone for video. I've been using the Xperias ever since the Pro I, and I absolutely love them. I recently just shot a piece for Xperia out in Havelock Island with the Xperia 1 Mark VI, and that video did have budget behind it, so technically this is a sponsored video. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the Pro Video feature that's just been added to the camera app. We obviously had Pro Photo, but now we've finally got Pro Video so that we can utilize all of the different filmmaking and monitoring tools that comes with the Pro Video app. The fact that this thing has got so many incredible video features, S-Cinetone for mobile, the autofocus technology from the Alpha line like eye tracking and object tracking, along with 4K 120 on all three of the different lenses, the 16mm, the 24mm, and also the 85 to 170mm telephoto zoom lens, combined with that 120mm telephoto macro mode. We can now actually utilize all of them different features in the Pro Video mode simply in the camera app. And we've also got an interface that has got loads of different tools from something like your Alpha cameras or your FX line like peaking, the function button, and also histograms. I remember on the Xperia 1 Mark V, I had to go into Videography Pro, and then there was Cinematography Pro, and then you had Photography Pro, all of these different apps that all done completely different things. The fact that we've now got it all in one app, the camera app, which you would expect it probably should be in the camera app. All of our different features are under one app, and it just makes life so much easier, and it's so much more user friendly now. So Xperia, appreciated, mate. So we can change all of our individual manual settings like your shutter speed, our ISO, our white balance. We've also got our customizable function button, just like you've got on your Alpha cameras or your FX cameras, and you can pretty much set up that function button exactly the same as you do on your Alpha cameras. So if you are going to jump from an Alpha camera or an FX camera to the Xperia, life is just so easy, mate. If you're a Sony shooter and you're using one of these, it's going to be a breeze, mate. We've also got some new monitoring features like the audio level meters, and also some other display features such as the display button toggle, so that we can just display our settings and take them off the screen, and obviously just have our histograms as and when we need to, which is really handy. We did have the histogram updated in the Xperia 1 Mark V, and in my opinion, that was probably the best pro feature that we could have got in the Xperia, because being able to actually scientifically expose your shot is such a better way to expose your shot rather than just going off of what the monitor sees. You can actually see your highlights and your shadows, and you can tell when you're peaking. That is going to allow you to get the absolute most out of any smartphone, and definitely out of the Xperia 1 Mark VI. And speaking of monitoring, Sony have just added what they're calling sunlight vision to the monitor, which allows the monitor to be an extra 50% brighter when you're monitoring your shot. And I was shooting out in midday on the beach in the middle of the Andaman Ocean, and I can tell you right now, this monitor went so bright that it was almost brighter than any dedicated monitor that I've ever used out in midday sun. And you would have thought that the battery life would have been absolutely demolished, and also this thing would get mega hot, but I didn't charge this thing up for 2 days while we were shooting, and I got absolutely no overheating warnings other than when I stuck this thing in the underwater housing. I actually stuck this thing in an underwater housing so that I could get some beautiful underwater shots. Obviously this phone isn't waterproof, especially in salt water, so definitely don't be using this thing underwater unless you've got a secure housing on it. But this thing looked absolutely gorgeous under the water, and I would without a doubt be using this over an action camera when you're shooting underwater shots, because that 24mm is absolutely gorgeous, and the Pro features just make it an absolute no-brainer to be shooting underwater content with. And going back to the battery life, Sony are essentially saying that this thing can do up to 2 days without charging it, and for me, I definitely got 2 days of shooting with this thing in the heat. I don't know what it's going to be like if you're going to continuously record for like 10 or 12 hours a day. It definitely ain't going to last that long, but the new and improved algorithms for the battery life on this thing, don't ask me about battery algorithms, but all I know is that the battery life on this thing is a bit good. Definitely a noticeable improvement from previous versions. And a phrase you'll probably like is Sony have now got their new vapor chamber cooling system. This whole vapor chamber system is probably the reason why this thing didn't want to overheat even in the midday sun. So anyway, enough of the tech and the specs. You lot know I really ain't the biggest techie, specky bloke. I just like to actually use cameras in real life situations just to see how good this thing is to actually use. Because at the end of the day, we're out here shooting in some really tough conditions sometimes, whether it's the weather or the clientele that you've got around you or just the situation that you're in to try and get the right shot. And obviously I've been using the Xperia for quite a while, and without a doubt, it's the best smartphone shooting experience that I've ever had. And just like with any smartphone, you definitely want to be using ND filters. I use ND filters a good 60% of the time when I'm shooting on this phone, because as filmmakers, we obviously want to keep that 180-degree shutter rule. And in my opinion, the best way to make a smartphone look like a cinema camera, or the best chance that you've got to make your smartphone look like a cinema camera, is increasing your motion blur by adding an ND filter and reducing your shutter speed to double your frame rate. I absolutely love shooting 120 frames in the macro mode, because in my opinion, when you're shooting macro, everything's so small and the slightest movement is so quickly out of frame or out of focus. So shooting 120 frames allows you to have 5 seconds for every second that you're actually recording. So it essentially elongates the amount of footage that you've actually captured within that second. You lot already know how 120 frames work. I'm not teaching you how to suck eggs. That 85 to 170mm telephoto zoom lens blew my mind. The fact that we can shoot 170mm and have quite a close focus distance and shoot 4K 120 in a tiny little device like this visually is a little bit perplexing, because you're like, this is definitely shot with a larger camera, a big long lens, but it ain't, mate. This tiny thin thing right here shot these 170mm 4K 120 frames. And all these shots of the lizard and the insects, all of these frames were shot handheld. Usually when you've got a really tight shot, you're gonna need a gimbal and something to stabilize your footage. But I literally just shot these shots in 4K 120. Obviously 120 slows it down a bit, so it does make it a bit more smooth. But these were actually handheld. The fact that you've got this much power in your pocket, handheld at 170mm, it's a bit worrying, mate. But you're not gonna get the best quality image out of that 85 to 170 in low light. I did notice that it does struggle a little bit in low light, especially compared to the 24mm. That 24mm is just gorgeous in low light situations. I could even blow out my highlights in blue hour just by like jumping up to 1200 ISO. You can actually go up to an ISO of 6400 on that 24mm, and it has got a beautiful amount of dynamic range, and that low light capability really gives it like a full frame feel. I could definitely cut this with one of my full frame cameras, and if it's graded right, I really don't think you're going to be able to tell the difference. Onto the autofocus, and ever since the Pro I, the Xperias have just been amazing at autofocus. They've been taking the autofocus technology from the Alpha line, so you'd expect it to be pretty damn good, and it is. That eye tracking and also the object tracking is just as good as the Alphas in my opinion. We have only got eye tracking and object tracking up to 30 frames, so I was using the different focus zones just like you would on an Alpha camera to get my focus points when I was using them higher frame rates. And something that I've just noticed about the Xperias over time, obviously I used the Xperia Pro I, and now we're on to the Xperia 1 Mark 6, is just how simple and how easy they are to use. And like, especially coming from a Sony camera. If you're coming from an Alpha or if you're coming from an FX camera, the image quality that you can get out of one of these is honestly mind-blowing. You've got so many of the different settings, specs and features that you'd have in an Alpha camera or an FX camera that you've now got in the Xperia, and it seems like such a seamless transition to jump between the two. And without a doubt, in certain situations, especially that 24mm, with the right light, I could definitely cut this with my FX3, my FX6. If I needed to get some underwater shots, I'd be sticking this thing in an underwater housing and using this instead of taking one of my larger Alpha cameras, sticking that in a massive expensive housing, risking one of my larger cameras, compared to this, which is pretty damn safe in an underwater housing. It's pretty mad to see the transition in filmmaking from larger cinema cameras when they were shooting film to digital cinema cameras, then DSLRs, mirrorless cameras, and now these things, mate. I honestly think this is where it's going. I'm seeing so many more incredible videos shot on a smartphone. And the fact that you can just stick this in your back pocket, couple of NDs, tiny little gimbal, is such an incredible place to be. Like, everyone's got access now to amazing camera equipment that's literally sat in your pocket. This thing is a beast, mate. I honestly don't have anything else to say. I've absolutely loved shooting with this thing, and if you haven't gone and checked out my shot on Xperia video that I shot in Havelock, definitely go over to the Xperia channel so that you can go and check it out. I'll leave a little link in my description, and I'll also leave a link so that you can check out the Xperia 1 Mark 6 so that you can actually try it out for yourself. Because if you haven't used an Xperia before, I think you'd be mind blown when you actually use it. The amount of people that message me saying they absolutely love this thing is a bit mad. Anyway, you lot, I hope you enjoyed this overview of the Pro Video feature in the Xperia 1 Mark 6 camera app. And as always, thank you to Xperia for trusting me to actually shoot some of their shot on videos. It is always a pleasure. And for you lot, as always, I'll be catching you lot in the next one, mate.